Okay, everybody, in this section, we're going to talk about the media and the media's effect on politics. And more, the media's kind of become the conduit as opposed to the political party between the candidate and the public. And things like social media have really kind of changed the game with regards to campaigning. So those who control the television networks are going to be the most powerful people in the nation, whether it's Rupert Murdoch, Sumner Redstone, Disney. They see themselves as active participants in the U.S. political process. They report on events. They discover events to report. They give us events specific and maybe even times of political meaning. They tell us whether or not it's important. And, it can challenge governmental officials, and it can define the problems of society. And it sometimes could get people pretty riled up. So the media is a very, very active participant in the world of American politics. So how do people get their media? How do people get their news? So let's look at this website. So this is from Pew Research, who does research for a variety of issues. If you could see right here, about 86% of the population gets their news from digital devices. 68% does it by TV. 50% gets it from radio, and 32% gets it from public publications, printed publications like newspapers or magazines. What we're going to look at a little bit is the amount of circulation that some of these newspapers have, and we're going to see that it's not as great a number as we might have been maybe 30, 40 years ago, but then again, our country has changed vastly since the advent of some kid coming at your door in the morning, throwing a newspaper on your porch, and you go and pick it up and open it up and read what's going on. Now, news is instantaneous. And I'm willing to bet a lot of you have maybe some type of notification that you may get when a news story breaks. I do. I actually use 10 News, which is the local news, and they do both local news and national news, and I think it's a very effective way of knowing and being informed on what's going on in the world. So you could see here, roughly half of Americans prefer to get their news on a digital platform. About a third prefer TV, because remember, digital platforms, a lot of it is instantaneous. News, sometimes you have to wait for it to come on the television, and by the time, if you miss it and you have maybe a streaming link, it might already be old news by the time you get it. So we have it way instantaneously, and we have it used a lot more often than we have in the past. We look at websites, we do searches, social media. I think social media, I was surprised that I would think it'd be a little bit higher. Because I think social media, people retweeting stuff or people posting stuff, it's kind of hard to decipher what's true or not at times. But I would have figured that social media would have been higher. And younger Americans get their news by a smartphone, and you could see it by age breakdown. As one gets older, they still kind of tend to use the print publications, but I think that's because kind of a habit maybe in old ways of thinking. That we don't have the news at 6 o'clock. Well, we still do, but the ratings aren't probably as strong as they used to be, where you would have Dan Rather come out in the news, or Peter Jennings come out, or Tom Brokaw come out and read the news to us and tell us things going on in the world. I think we're too busy now with the concept of streaming and having instantaneous notifications of news. I think that both the print media and the television media has really gone down, and specifically the television media has gone to maybe more opinion-based shows. So some media elite claim to that they super mirror reality, and they have the power to elevate some national issues, ignore others, elevate maybe an obscure person, reward some politicians, and punish others. And then we could see, in instances where that maybe, these ideological news shows will do that. Like Fox will talk bad about the Democratic Party. MSNBC will talk bad about the Republican Party, and it's kind of an endless circle, and something that actually personally really frustrates me. So we look at the print media here. USA Today has the biggest circulation of 2 million subscribers, 2.3 million. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the LA Times, the New York Post, and you can see the numbers dwindling down. And it's just real evident that a lot of people are going to mobile devices. So the news-making media decides what is newsworthy. They are able to allocate time and newspaper space. Media attention will create events, issues, personalities, and they'll definitely frame things to kind of get people's attention. They also tell us how to interpret the news. So newsmakers will provide the masses with explanations and meanings of events to kind of give us a way to maybe interpret events, listening news specials, ideological talk show hosts, whether it's Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, Rachel Maddow. They all have their own spin, and they try to influence how their viewers will look at news and maybe come up with meanings for an event. And, again, it's going to be an ideological based platform, so you're going to get a spin on it. They also socialize us, and they tell us what is important. It teaches the mass audience the elite's preferred political norms and values through news and entertaining programs. Social media will spread societal norms and values without elite interference because you don't have the filtration, you don't have the editing. People can put things out and touch millions and millions of people instantaneously with news. Now, the problem with that is deciphering what is true and what is not. Blogs and individual run websites can also reach mass audiences easily, but I don't think they're as in vogue as they used to be. I think people will basically go on social media and espouse their views and, in a sense, get that out instead of posting it to a blog or a website. I just think it's easier, and you can reach millions and millions of people instantaneously. They also help persuade us. So this occurs when the government, corporations, unions, political parties, and candidates try to make attempts to directly affect our beliefs, our attitudes about our issue, and how we conduct ourselves. Campaigns are the most obvious. Campaign is all about trying to get a person to vote for you. And even though more so now, candidates are relying really less on party organizations where, maybe in a sense, you don't have as many people going out and knocking on doors and putting up signs as you used to, but maybe social media is used a lot better and a lot more effective, like I said, because you get that message out quicker and instantaneously, and you can reach a whole lot more people. A lot of these campaigns will have public relations specialists that work directly with candidates and the news media, and they get paid pretty well doing that. They also set the agenda, and this is the real power of the mass media, defining what issues are put out there, looking at policy alternatives, focusing on what could be crises, whether they're political, economic, or social. And we've known in the past couple of years, COVID, coronavirus, the whole pandemic has really been played up on the news, and it was one of the things that we learned a lot about it, and maybe learned some of the maybe things that weren't so true, or maybe the things that you're able to verify. But the reason it was out there is because the news media decided to report on it. And political elites should decide on solutions to problems, and media elites determine what those problems are. So the media will come out and address the problems. You'll get people riled up. You'll get people interested. And then it's the job of the political elites to decide what the solutions to those problems are. So, here in the United States, we have an overwhelmingly bias toward negative news stories. Even if, it could seem to be at times really kind of redundant and negative, but bad news is good news, and good news does not stir audience interest. One thing that I can remember is a news story about a Girl Scout that sold the most cookies here in San Diego County, and she was put on the news. She wasn't put on the news because she achieve that goal. She was put on the news because other parents complained that she set up shop outside a cannabis dispensary, which was brilliant. Just kidding. Yeah, this is really intelligent to do. But you could see in some instances how this feel good story was not reported, but then once somebody had a problem with her standing outside the dispensary, it became a more sensationalized story and it was more interesting. Entertainment programs reinforce kind of the negative picture of life in the U.S. Murder is the least common crime in the real world, but it's the far most common crime on television. And, especially with Netflix and Hulu and all of these streaming services now, Disney Plus, HBO Max, who has a lot of original content, a lot of that original content is now murder-based or violent. One of my favorite programs since I got Netflix has been the Narcos series, whether it's Narcos Colombia or Narcos Mexico. I thought it was a very, very well-written show. I thought the acting was great. I thought the dialogue was really well done, especially the Mexico one. Usually when you hear sometimes where people write Spanish, they write it proper way instead of like based off of the region that person lives in. I think the Spanish in Narcos Mexico was very, very well written. But that show had a lot of murders in it. So practically every show, right? So practically every episode had some type of violence in it. And it kind of looks at not just a negative picture of life here in the U.S., but also in other parts of the world. There's shows like NCIS that focus on murder, Law and Order. It's just kind of ingrained in our fabric, and even in movies. And trust me, I love to watch the Bruce Willis Die Hard series. Those are one of my favorite movies. But yeah, there's a lot of movies that have violence in it, and sometimes it's not violence that is necessary at times. It's more of just for show. I like the MCU and Star Wars, and all those movies are violent. Maybe not as gory, but still have aspects of violence to it. And when we talk about it, sex and violence, historically reputable newspapers declined to report on sex lives of the politicians. Today, there's no limits, and I think ever since the Clinton administration, that's where we've kind of seen the gloves being taken off of the new people that report the news, because there was always accusations about Kennedy having extramarital affairs, but nobody reported onto it until well after he was gone. So I mean, why didn't they report about it then? I think they had a lot more respect. But now I think one of the arguments is that when we find out about moral lives of candidates, it kind of helps us make a choice when we're voting. And they should be voted on. I don't think it's as much of a problem as it used to be. The whole Clinton impeachment scandal was very salacious and always on TV, and people were really paying attention to it. But I think now it's not as a big a story if there's some type of scandal that happens. And we can even say that the fact that our entertainment has become increasingly sex obsessed and profanity ridden, whether it's TV shows, movies, music, or whatever. So social media and social costs of media content. People who are exposed to political scandal and corruption lose trust in government. And sometimes television malaise can result in a cynicism and maybe influence people not to vote. While mainstreaming violence and sex may be an expression of freedom, it ignores the freedom of persons who must now live in a society where there's brutality and denigration of women in shows. There's also a bias in the news. The values of the newsmakers and the elite include liberal reforms, social welfare. I don't necessarily agree with the authors' note that there's a suspicion of business, and I think there's a suspicion of business, but I don't think there's a hostility toward the military. I think that maybe be a little bit too critical. And there's always the urge for government to use their power to do good. Fox Television News basically brought a more conservative view, and now we also have things like Newsmax and One American Network that are really, really right-leaning. And then on the other side, you have your MSNBC and your CNN, which has a little bit more of a liberal lean. And I think if you truly want to maybe find a neutral news organization, I can think of two. I think NPR, which is National Public Radio, is pretty well right down the middle, and also Al Jazeera America. They're pretty good. They have good news stories, and they really look at it from both sides. But there is a division between mass audiences where viewers on Hannity will be more conservative. Self-described moderates and liberals will prefer CNN. And Republicans and conservatives are far more likely than Democrats and liberals to listen to talk radio. Again, I think radio is kind of a dying medium too, with the evolution of things like satellite radio and now podcasts. Ben Shapiro is probably one of the biggest podcasters out there, has a huge following. Joe Rogan has a huge following, and they can either use, you can either listen to it by a podcast app on your phone and listen to it when you are ready to, or listen to it when it's live off of something like YouTube. I think a lot of these podcasters are doing a pretty good job of doing that, and you'll have them. You'll have an ideological-based podcast. You'll have sports-based podcasts. You'll have entertainment-based podcasts. I do listen to the Joe Rogan one every so often. I don't necessarily agree with what he says a lot of the some issues, but I do like his interviewing of athletes and stuff like that. I don't normally listen to Fox or anything like that, but there are other podcasts that I listen to as well that are really interesting. We also have Hollywood liberals, and these people play an important role in socializing young Americans in the political world. They're 4 times more likely to be Democrat, 4 times as likely to be liberal, and 5 times as likely to be more Democrat. You have DiCaprio, who does a lot about climate change. Mark Ruffalo, who plays the Hulk, who does a lot of work with regards to Native American rights as well as climate change. George Clooney, who is an active member of the Democratic Party. Chris Evans, same thing, who runs a organization that tries to get civility back in politics by being able to talk about politics. And he also is an advocate of same-sex rights, as his brother is gay, and he's really fought for same-sex rights. Now, we look at this. Here are our top-rated news shows on cable TV. So Tucker Carlson, Jesse Waters, Rachel Maddow, Gutfield, I believe his name is Greg Gutfield, Anderson Cooper, Alex Wagner, and you can see the 5: Fox News, Tucker Carlson, Hannity, Waters, Maddow, Ingraham, Brett Baier, Gutfield. So Fox News has 9 of the top 10 shows. I'm not quite sure what reason is that for. I don't know if it's quality or if that's just maybe a behavior that people who are conservative are a little bit more attached to these shows. The 3 million viewers, I guess, per day. There's also things where it can prevent bias and slander. So, let me get this back up. Had a crash real quick, so. So let's talk a little bit about biases and slander. So, no prior restraint. Freedom of the press has been interpreted to mean that the government may not censor news items, but also if the government wishes to keep military secrets secret, it's probably pretty much known that they need to keep it out of the hands of the media and out of the hands of things like WikiLeaks. Now, there's a case that deals with libel and slander. This is New York Times versus Sullivan. This establishes the Sullivan rule. And one thing about the Sullivan Rule, it makes it very, very difficult to sue based off of a written communication that may not be true or slanderous material. You can look at the case of Alex Jones and the Sandy Hook case, which is a pretty good illustration of you not being able to say what you want to say. There are repercussions. So in this case, the Sullivan Rule establishes that in a libel or slander case, the plaintiff or the person that is suing, if he or she is a public figure, they must prove that the publisher of the statement or the person that spoke the statement in question knew that that statement was false or acted in reckless disregard of its truth. All right, so it places the burden on the plaintiff to prove that that person that said something libelous or slanderous knew it to be false and did it intentionally to harm you. It's a very high standard of proof. So it's hard for the plaintiff to be able to prove the defendant's knowledge and intentions. Such claims by public figures really rarely prevail. So in this case, if you are suing somebody based off of libel or slander and you're a public person, you have to be able to show that that statement caused you irreparable harm and was done recklessly and with, an intentional disregard of the truth. So here's a video you could watch about the Sullivan Rule. I've embedded it here in the slides, so just go ahead and take a look at it when you get a chance. So the internet has become a major source of news, particularly for younger and more educated people. By about 2021, 80% of poll respondents said they got most of their national and international news online. And as of July 2021, the U.S. population has the internet has a penetration rate of 90% of the population here in the United States. So 90% of the population can access the internet. And if we look at the top 15 news sites here, Yahoo is your most visited internet website, internet news site. Then you have Google News, Huffington Post, and these are by month. CNN, the New York Times, Fox, NBC News, and Mail Online. So Yahoo has about 175 million visitors in a monthly period. Now, why is that? So I kind of thought about this. Why is Yahoo the most visited site? And one of the reasons I probably can come up with is maybe people have Yahoo as their default homepage when they sign in and they hit that little Google Chrome button or Safari button. It brings it to Yahoo News. So I don't know. That's maybe one of the reasons why. It's just kind of unconventional to believe that Yahoo News would have the most number of hits each month. But I think that might be the reason, is people set their homepage to that website. Now we talk about politics and the internet. Almost all agencies will have websites, right? Whether it's Social Security, whether it's the Federal Communications Commission, the Department of Defense. They usually maintain websites to give people information and sometimes also to provide customer service type things. But there's been attempts to outlaw the internet and outlaw content that is on the internet. The internet allows for unrestricted freedom of speech or freedom of expression. There was originally a law passed in 1996 called the Communications Decency Act, and this attempted to outlaw indecent and patently offensive material on the internet. This was struck down by the Supreme Court because it said the government may not limit the adult population to consuming only what is fit for children. So basically that's why the internet is pretty wide open. Now obviously if something is illegal, it can't be on the internet. And we're going to actually talk about this a little bit more when we get into a court case called Miller versus California. And that's going to establish how you might be able to determine whether or not something is obscene. And one way to determine if something is obscene is if it's illegal, then it could be considered obscene. So you can't put illegal content on the internet because applying community standards, if it's illegal, then it is not protected speech or protected expression. But we'll get more into that later. The Federal Communications Commission is an independent agency of the United States government that created a statute to regulate interstate communication by radio, television, wire, satellite, and cable. Between 1990 and 2004, this gentleman named Howard Stern was on the radio. The Federal Communications Commission had issued fines in totaling $2.5 million to radio stations for what they may have deemed to be indecent. Again, the only problem with this is, decency is a subjective term, right? What may be indecent to you may not be indecent to me, and vice versa. But yeah, I mean, it's a really subjective way of looking at things, and it actually caused him to leave, terrestrial radio, and take up shop on satellite radio, where there's really no restrictions. The Janet Jackson, Justin Timberlake Super Bowl controversy still has effects to today. Performance during Super Bowl 35 in 2004, Jackson's breast was exposed for 9/16 of a second. I remember watching it, and I didn't even really notice until people started to make a big deal about it. So the FCC fined CBS $550,000 because of this. This was eventually overturned by the Supreme Court, and now a 5-second delay is now required on live performances. And if you watch things like the NBA or the NFL, you'll hear naughty words come out every once in a while. But then most of the time you'll hear like a dead air, where you'll hear somebody say you'll hear the crowd noise, and then dead air. That usually means somebody cussed, and the network hit a button to prevent that word from going out over live air. Saving Private Ryan, which is actually one of my favorite movies of all time. This used to be played on Veterans Day, and in the wake of the Jackson Timberlake incident, television stations were afraid to air the movie unedited. Has a lot of F words, a lot of cussing, some very, very violent war images. Actually, sometimes at times too realistic. Some TV stations were scared to play it during Veterans Day because they were in fear they were going to get fined. The FCC later decided that movie was not obscene, and in most instances that movie is aired unedited. And if you edit that movie down, you're really, really going to take the art away from it, and the realism that is part of it, and that really makes that movie great. I encourage you to watch it. We'll talk a little bit more about it when we get to World War II. It's a very difficult movie to watch because it's really realistic, and you actually really start caring about the people in the movie. And it is a real tribute to modern movie making and how it is brilliantly shot. The first 20 minutes is the D-Day invasion, and it's a really good illustration of how a bunch of young men were out there, and some of them weren't coming back, and that's the reality of things. So here's a trailer for Saving Private Ryan. Right now it's restricted because of the network I'm on, but you should be able to use it and watch the trailer if you haven't seen the movie yet. Now, social media, things like YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, if you're a serious political candidate or interest group or movement, you can't be without a Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter presence. And half of all social network users share or repost news. So you can see that you're going to reach even more people. So as a result of this, we've kind of seen a declining in parties. The media has replaced the party organizations as the principal link between the candidate and the voter. Because remember, that instantaneous message can get out. No longer do we have to wait till the 6 o'clock news to come on to be able to learn about a candidate or learn about issues or whatever. Television largely focuses on candidate image and not policy questions. Like we mentioned with the election part of this class, most people will vote off of a candidate's image. Media is going to cover elections as a game of speeches, rallies, press conference travels, and debates. I think some of the most watched television programs in history are the debate shows, and don't think that candidate image doesn't have an influence on this. We can go back to the 1960 presidential election just as proof, where television was in its infancy. You had Kennedy and Nixon debating. There's been surveys done that people who listened to the debate on radio thought Nixon won, and people that watched TV, televised debate, thought Kennedy won. Kennedy, this young bachelorette type guy, Handsome was able to appeal to voters, where Nixon was not feeling well. He didn't want to put on any makeup. He didn't shave, and he looked kind of creepy to people. So, it might be underrated, but a lot of people will vote because of that. We also have horse racing reporting. Polling is a very big thing here in the United States, and we've already seen polls that are kind of trying to give us an idea who's in the lead and who's behind. So very much kind of like a horse race type situation. When we look at negative news stories, we talked about a little about that. News stories about the Republicans and the Democrats are typically negative when they're running for president. We also have a shrinking soundbite at times, where shrinking soundbites can be dangerous. The average soundbite for a presidential candidate is less than 8 seconds, which is hard because sometimes you can't get the full context of the statement during that time. Let's have late night laughs, and I have a video that is attached here where Saturday Night Live in the early 90s made fun of Bill Clinton when he was running for president. I want you to watch that, kind of for some levity. Late night talk shows played an important role in campaigning. In 2016, presidential candidates appeared on late night programs over 100 times. I think in 2020, it wasn't really, you didn't really have much significance because of the pandemic. And Republican candidates are generally joked about 4 times as much as Democrats. And for younger voters, people watched The Daily Show last week tonight. As a matter of fact, I have another video that is posted here with regards to Jon Stewart, who went out and tried to aid veterans who were affected by fire pits. Now, I want you to watch a little bit of his speech and how he's using his celebrity kind of for a more positive thing. So just watch Jon Stewart's speech. I'll note it in our announcements section when it's sent. But just watch that speech, only his. You can watch the other ones too. There's no problem with that. But look at him trying to use his celebrity for a positive thing. So when we talk about assessing the media's impact, we might experience something like information overload. We might tune things out, selective perception. Public opinion's influenced. I think a person is rational, but sometimes people are irrational. And television is more likely to reinforce behavioral tendencies than to change them. And just a little bit more about the media and elitist interpretation. So yeah, let's go ahead and watch those 2 videos that I posted. Remember, on the Jon Stewart video, you just have to watch Jon Stewart's part. You don't have to watch the other speeches unless you want to. All right, thanks a lot.